In this video, we are going to explain the rules and show you how to play Race for the Galaxy on Board Game Arena, where it plays from 2 to 5 players. You can also play it with 6 players if you turn the expansions on. We can see over here that you can play the base game, or you can add the Gathering Storm expansion, or you can put both the Gathering Storm and Rebel vs. Imperium expansions on together. In this video, we are just going to be looking at the base game, however. On Board Game Arena, anyone can host a table of the Race for the Galaxy base game, but you must be a Board Game Arena club member to host tables containing the expansions. As always, though, anyone can join a table where the expansions are hosted. You do not have to be a Board Game Arena club member to do so. With that, let's go ahead and get started here. Race for the Galaxy is played in rounds composed of up to 5 phases, which will vary depending which phases players choose to play at the beginning of each round. The game proceeds until the end of a round when at least one player has 12 or more cards in their tableau, or the victory point ship supply is empty. At this point, players earn additional points for the effects of cards they have in their play areas, and whoever has the most points wins. Before going over the rules, let's take a look at the interface. The first thing to look at is your personal game information box, which can be found up here. Firstly, the star at the top indicates how many victory points you have. You can see I already have 1 because I have this world here, while my opponent has 0 because this world in his area is not worth any points. We'll explain how points on worlds and developments are calculated shortly. Next, the hand symbol below this shows the number of cards you have in your hand, and this blue chip here shows the number of victory point chips you've obtained during the game. This red circle beside that shows your current military value. Mine is actually 1, while my opponent's is 0 because this card gives me military. Lastly, this shows how many cards a player has in their tableau, so we can see we both start the game with 1 card in there. Before the game gets underway, you are dealt a hand of 6 cards, which you can see here. Your first decision in the game is to choose to discard 2 of these cards, such as these 2, which you do by clicking on them like so. Once all players have done this simultaneously, the game will be underway and each player starts the actual game with 4 cards. At the beginning of each round, all players will secretly and simultaneously select bonuses from this bar up here. In a 2-player game, each player will select 2 bonuses each, and in a 3 or more player game, each player will select 1 bonus each. When all players have chosen their bonuses, all players will perform the corresponding actions, but only the players who picked a certain bonus will get it. Any actions where no bonuses were selected will not be performed by any player this round. For demonstrational purposes, we're going to go ahead and select the Develop and Settle bonuses. When all selections have been made, the round plays out in order from Explore to Produce, with only those phases that were selected actually occurring. We can see, for instance, that nobody selected a Consumer Produce bonus, so these are faded out here to indicate they are not going to happen. But because our opponent selected an Explore bonus, we're going to start the turn out with the Explore phase here. The default Explore action taken by all players is to draw 2 cards and select one of them to add to their hand, discarding the other, as we can see here. Players who chose Explore will draw or keep additional cards, however. There are actually 2 Explore bonuses to choose from, one of which was represented by a +5/+0 that allows the player who picked it to draw 5 additional cards, but still only keep 1. In that way, they would normally draw 7 cards and keep 1. The second bonus is a +1/+1, which allows the player who picked it to draw 1 additional card and add 1 more card from those drawn to his or her hand. This typically allows them to draw 3 cards and keep 2. In our case, however, our opponent selected both bonuses, so you can see here the +5/+0 and the +1/+1 have been added together, so he actually draws 8 cards and is allowed to keep 2. I do want to point out, though, that even though our opponent selected both Explore bonuses, the Explore phase only occurs 1 time. So we're going to go ahead and simultaneously make our selections. I'm going to choose the Tourist World here, while my opponent gets to pick 2 cards from their hand, because remember, they used both Explore bonuses. Next, we're going to move on to the Develop phase, since it's the next selected phase in order. There are 2 types of cards in Race for the Galaxy, which are Worlds and Developments. Worlds have their cost in a circle, which you can see here, while Developments have their cost in a diamond like this one. On both card types, their victory point value is displayed in the small hexagon next to their cost. So for instance, we can see here this card is worth 1 victory point at the end of the game if it's in your play area, and this one over here is worth 3. During the Develop phase, players may secretly and simultaneously play a development card from their hand to their tableau. To play a development, you just click it, and then you must discard as many cards as it costs to play. We can see here this card costs 1 because there's a 1 inside this diamond, so normally I would click it, then I'm going to have to discard 1 other card from my hand. However, if you choose Develop, like we did here, you get to pay 1 card less as your bonus. With that in mind, I could develop this card, which normally costs 1, for free. But before I do that, I want to point out you can always choose not to develop, and you do not have to place one at this time. So I'm going to go ahead and develop this card at no cost because of the bonus I get for choosing develop. We can see, however, that my opponent played a mining robots development and had to pay its full cost of 2 because he did not choose develop himself. There is one important restriction to remember when developing, and that's that you can only have one copy of each card in your play area. So for instance, on a later turn, I would not be able to develop another public works because I already have one here. Once in play, developments have many different abilities that will affect gameplay. The abilities are shown on icons, which you will become more familiar with as you play, but you can always mouse over the cards on Board Game Arena to get a description of their effects. Since all players have finished their development phases, we're going to move on to the next chosen phase, which was settle. Like the development phase, during the settle phase, players may secretly and simultaneously choose to play a world from their hands to their play area. As always, they may also click choose not to pass for this phase. There are two types of worlds in this game. The first we're going to call normal worlds, which have their cost outlined in a black circle like you can see here. The other type are known as military worlds, and they have their cost outlined in a red circle like this one. The distinction between the two world types is significant because the rules for settling each are different. Settling a normal world works like playing a development that you have to discard that many cards. So for instance, if I wanted to settle this normal world here, I would have to discard 3 other cards from my hand to do so. To settle a military world, however, you must have military strength equal to or greater than its cost. We can see this world here has a cost of 1, and my military strength is 1, so I could play this card without paying anything further. To be clear, if you do not have enough military to settle a military world, you cannot choose to discard cards to settle it. You must have enough military to settle a military world. Also, for normal worlds, you cannot use military to settle them. You must discard the necessary number of cards. For demonstrational purposes, because I have enough military, I'm going to go ahead and click this military world and settle it for free. You will also see I drew a card in the process. That is the bonus for settling. If you choose the settle phase and you play a world, you draw a card after doing so. Some worlds also have a halo around their cost, and these are known as windfall worlds. Whenever you settle a windfall world, you're immediately going to place 1 resource on it, matching its color type. We can see my opponent's starting world was actually a windfall world, and that's why it starts with 1 brown resource on it. No other worlds get a resource placed on them when they are played, even solid colored production worlds. Because all phases that were selected this round were completed, the round ended and a new one begins, with us having an opportunity to choose 2 new bonuses. I also want to point out that at the end of each round, any player with more than 10 cards in his or her hand must discard down to 10. Briefly, I want to point out that both settle and develop can be selected twice by 1 player. This is unique to the 2-player game, since in all other player counts, each player only gets to choose 1 bonus each round. When settle or develop is selected twice by 1 player, the bonus is not doubled, such as discarding 2 cards less during develop or drawing 2 cards after settling. But instead, the entire phase occurs 2 times in a row, with that player receiving the bonus both times. In the event that you choose a phase twice and your opponent chooses it once, they would only get their bonus for selecting that phase the first time it occurs. So in this example here, if my opponent also chose settle 1 time while I chose it twice, they would get the settle bonus only during the first settle phase. From here, I want to point out that consume and produce were not selected last round, so they did not occur. We have another match farther along than this one, so we're going to jump over to that to provide a better example of the consume and produce phases. We can see here that this will be the last round of the game. We know that because there are only 4 victory point chips left in the victory point supply here, and the consume powers we are going to use this round are going to earn more than 4 points. Firstly, we have selected the development phase here so we can play a development from our hand by paying 3 less. 1 for selecting develop here, and 2 more because this card gives us 2 off all future developments that we play. So we can play replicant robots by discarding only 1 card. So now we move on to the consume phase because it was the next one selected, and we can see that I selected the trade bonus represented by the $sign while my opponent selected the ×2 bonus. Even though both bonuses were selected, and even if they were both selected by the same player, the consume phase only occurs once. Firstly, any player choosing the trade bonus, which is what I did, may sell a resource off one of the worlds by clicking on it. Depending what color resource it was, the player will draw a different number of cards. It's 2 cards for a blue resource, 3 for a brown, 4 for a green, and 5 for a yellow. I actually got to draw 3 cards for selling my blue resource because I have an ability on a development card down here that lets me do so. My opponent did not select the trade bonus though, so they do not get to sell a resource, but because the trade bonus is part of the consume phase occurs at this time. I do want to note though that in this particular case the consume phase would have occurred anyway because my opponent selected the ×2 bonus, but the consume phase would still occur if only the trade bonus was selected. During the consume phase, all players must consume any resources they have on their worlds with any consume powers they have. Consume powers are totally mandatory and are located next to the Roman numeral 4 on each card you can see here. So we can see this is a consume power and this is a consume power as well. Some consume powers award victory points while others allow the user to draw cards, and some do a combination of both. To use a consume power, you can click the resource you wish to consume, and then you click the world with a power. We can see that this world's consume power will give me 1 victory point, so I'm going to click a resource. It does not have to be a resource on that world, and then I'm going to click that world to use its power. Each consume power can only be used a limited number of times though, so for instance, I would not be able to click this one and use that consume power again. I can, however, use it over here, which this consume power lets me draw 1 card. So I draw that card to my hand, and now I'm out of consume powers that I can use. My opponent, however, selected the ×2 bonus, so when he uses his consume powers, he's going to get 2 times the points. I want to point out that this bonus does not double the amount of cards you draw from consume powers though. So if he uses this consume power here, for instance, he's going to get 2 points instead of the normal 1, but he's still going to only draw 1 card. And of course, we can see him do that as he clicks his resources and uses their consume powers. So we see over here he scored 2 points, but only drew 1 card. As the consume phase is finishing, we can see the victory point pool is down to 1. If it ever goes to 0 or to the negatives, which is what it's about to do when he uses this consume power here, the game will be over this round. Remember that alternatively, the game also ends at the end of a round when one player has 12 or more cards in their tableau. In either case, however, you will always play out the entire round all the way to the produce phase if it was selected. It was selected this turn, so we're going to do it once he consumes his final resource, and we can see that the produce phase is underway. During produce, all production worlds, which are the solid colored worlds with no halo around them, produce 1 resource of their matching type. We can see here these are production worlds and they've each produced a blue resource, even though I did not pick produce myself. It's also important to note that each world can only hold 1 resource, so if for instance this one already had 1 blue resource on it, it would not produce again. The bonus of the player who selected produce is that they may also produce on 1 windfall world of their choice in their area. All they have to do to accomplish this is to click on it. So for instance, this guy is probably going to click on this world here, and he's going to produce on it as his bonus. Now the round is over and I have more than 10 cards in my hand, so I have to discard down to 10 cards. Before I do that, however, I want to point out that our victory point totals for the cards in our play area and our victory point chips have already been totaled up here. This number does not take into account some of the extra points I'm going to get for the effects of cards in my play area, but as soon as I discard these 3 cards, the game is going to be over. The final situation looks like this. Thank you for watching, and please remember to like and subscribe.